I'll be honest when starting this video, storytelling games or walking simulators aren't really my cup of tea, which is ironic since my channel's theming takes heavily from a visual novel. Anyways, I've always been interested in Dead by Daylight's world. One of them is the entity itself, the way it works, the different realms and sub-realms, and the cycles it has. Dead by Daylight for some is just gameplay running around a shack, but when you really peel back the layers, there's a deep lore. The universal perks talk about survivors lost to time, likely suffering the void, the observer watching over the tomes who's been missing for a while now, the mysterious Vigo, the creator of the hatch, and that's just touching the tip of the world building. It's what I love about Dead by Daylight, and for Dead by Daylight to team up with Supermassive Games, the creator behind hits like The Quarry and Until Dawn, it should be a fun ride. I'm going to be splitting this review into 6 sections, and I'll be rating them each from 1 to 5. 1 being bad and 5 being great. We will be doing this single player because none of my friends are willing to play with me. But before getting in, I just want to say the game has a slick main menu. Doesn't tell you much, but it just asks you to link accounts and the obvious settings you mess around with, like nice accessibility options like closed captions, colored captions, and things for dyslexic people like me, and text size options. It's really small things, but it's things that I'm really thankful for. But enough about the main menu, let's go see why Franklin is casting stones. And of course, spoilers ahead.
I've sacrificed everything searching for it. A world within a story whispered to me centuries ago. Of a timeless power, infinite in knowledge, voracious in hunger. The entity. A realm so close to ours, but always out of reach. Until I found him. Frank Stone. My key. My killer. I am Augustine Lieber. And I'm about to change our worlds forever.
The game's plot is actually interesting. The first chapter is in 1963, and is basically the origin story for the titular Frank Stone. It builds up to the eventual face-off you have with him as Sam Green. You have a scripted duel, and regardless if the baby dies or not, Frank Stone dies, and a nice detail about his death is that his maw gets detached, the same spot that he removed on his mask. After that, the game goes back and forth between 1980s and 2024. Each side is 2 different views. 2024 follows Maddie, Sam, and Linda Castle. All their interactions are mainly exploring and eventually surviving the manor that they get themselves trapped in after Augustine, the true mastermind, tempts them with money. In Stan and Linda's case, and favors for Maddie, for the film strips, and each of them have on Murder Mill. While in the 1980s is the journey to creating the movie Murder Mill, in which the title suggests eventually Frank Stone casts himself as the killer. He may not be an alien, but whatever happened to him after his death is otherworldly to be sure. I think the story is the strongest aspect. It has slow burn at the start, getting you a good feel for the characters, making you care for them a little until they really start dying at chapter 6. After one mess up, it just lights out after that. The game wears the fact that it's connected to the Dead by Daylight's expansive world on its sleeve, with things like referencing Larry's Memorial Institute.
The CIA's got this secret lab called Leary's Memorial Institute where they use it for enhanced interrogation.
There's a part talking about a lost movie and a reference to an actor that's going missing, and with any surviving footage, was this mysterious fog that would be seen, which is a connection to how the entity takes its victims, and the multiple killer plushes and add-ons being little trinkets. The only issue that the story faces is how it goes back and forth so much. After the initial introduction of each group, the game doesn't give you multiple chapters to set you down with them. It's just 2024, back to 1980, back to 2024, back to 1980. The game works on this being cliffhangers between chapters. I'll just use an example, the jumps between chapter 4 to 8. Chapter 4 ends with there being a figure outside the manor. Then we go straight back to 1980s for chapter 5, which ends with Frank Stone's spectral body materializing after them snooping around the mill, leaving either Jaime alive or dead, and Chris is flung into 2024, which isn't known until chapter 8. back to 2024 for Chapter 6, is exploring Augustine's collection, finding the old Super 8 they used to record Murder Mill, and the intruder being revealed to be Sam Green, back to 1980s for Chapter 7, where we use the Super 8 to fend off Frank Stone, and then abruptly changing to Chapter 8, where we turn off the sarcophagus to free Chris, and then the big reveal that we're dealing with a multiverse as Sam Green isn't from his original timeline, and the different reality versions of Murder Mill. It just feels all over the place. It makes it hard to really get invested to the characters when you keep picking up and being thrown to another timeline and place so often. How I would have personally structured it is have Chapter 1 to 5 the same, but keep 1980 going until Chris is taken and Jaime's fate to be decided by the player, go back to 2024 until the Super 8 is revealed, and then go back to 1980 up until the point in my playthrough Bonnie gets hooked. And then back to 2024 up until they enter the room to see the film strip from Murder Mill. From there, the game just plays like it did initially. This does have issues though, mainly of them not witnessing Bonnie's death with my changing of the story, but I think it will help keep players invested and will keep them back for and what will happen to Chris, and when Bonnie gets hooked, multiple characters will Linda be safe, and I don't know if this is just nitpicking at this point, but it's just how it feel about it personally. I know that people will have gripes of it being a multiverse, not just time traveling. The fact that it's revealed in Chapter 8 as Augustine has literal thousands of alternate murder mills from different timelines as she causes the bleed between worlds to gain the entity's favor, but it's Dead by Daylight tie-in game, and multiverses have been in Dead by Daylight since its inception, so I'm fine with that fact. Multiverses are good when done correctly, and Dead by Daylight uses it to world build, and personally, I think they underuse it in this game, but overall, I think they did a good job with what they had with the story. I do think the jumping from timeline hinders the storytelling a bit, but regardless, it's pretty straightforward, and it rewards you with little lore tidbits when you look around and know what it is, and I can't hate it for that. 4 out of 5. Like I said in the story section, I think due to the fact that the game jumps back and forth between timelines, you don't really get a good feel for the characters, and unfortunately it doesn't help that for the most part, I didn't like the cast, both the movie makers and the film holders. I genuinely love Sam Green and Tom, they worked off of each other really well, and Tom just wanted to live an honest life after being a veteran in World War II, while Sam Green is hell-bent on finding the bastard who's been kidnapping and killing without rhyme or reason. And eventually he does, being crowned the hero of Cedar Hills, and inspiring Tom to stop drinking, just the little ways that his character rubs off on people.
I can remember it clear as a bell. Don't think I've ever experienced anything like that night, before or since. And don't reckon I ever will again. Heck, I don't know if I would have even made it out alive if it weren't for Sam Green. Man's a hero. Damn shame that no good sheriff's taking all the credit. Him crying shame. He all but gave up on finding Stone at the mill. Sam Green, he knew better. He came right up and told me we had to search every nook and cranny of that place. And if we had waited just a second longer, well, there'd be one less beautiful baby in the world. Or worse. Sam took Stone down just in the nick of time. Like something out of a movie.
Thanks to Mr. Holt, nobody questioned my dad's story.
Wow.
They were friends after that. My dad gave the eulogy when Mr. Holt passed.
He returns in both 1980s and 2024. In the 80s timeline, he's a protective father, being quite antagonistic to the filming crew, but he does that out of wanting to keep people safe. And he saw something during that night, stalking the mill every night, which Robert says. And in 2024, where he's definitely aware of what's going on. And it's more of a sandbag, to be honest, for the death flags, where he sacrifices himself in most situations. Regardless of that, he is still one of my favorite characters next to Linda Castle, who feels like the real main character, having the most ways to die, but it's connected to both the cast of 1980 and 2024 from the start. She has the most chemistry between the characters too, getting along with everyone for the most part, but you feel it the most with Maddie. Unfortunately in my playthrough, Maddie died quite early due to my sick interest, but she's a connection and comfort character for her. She knew Bonnie quite well a long time ago, and Bonnie was the person who inspired her to leave Cedar Hills to pursue being a director. Actually, one of my favorite scenes in the game, it was in Chapter 4, where Maddie was talking to herself specifically to Bonnie since it comforts her, and then Linda and her have a moment where Linda reminisces about the past. Linda feels like a mentor for Maddie, and I've really enjoyed their chemistry, and Maddie herself is a fine character, but it may be due to her life running short in my playthrough, but she really doesn't have much going on. You get a quick gist of her character. She's a daughter of 2 mothers, she's a shy and nervous person, but she has a good heart. She just feels like a, cookie cutout character for these types of games, all things considered. The generic young adult who has a whole life ahead of them, which isn't anything bad, but it just leaves a lot to be desired. And honestly, most of the cast after that kind of fades into the cliche or just forgettable. Stan is a snobby douche who takes advantage of Robert to get his film strip. He's just played as an arrogant and rich. He's obviously the character you won't feel bad for when he dies. Chris is just a bratty girl, to be honest. She just wants her film to be made and doesn't like being told no. She has a bright personality but isn't all that smart. She's in it for the ride, basically being reinvigorated and making a film when she heard about Frank Stone's killings, and eventually using real severed hands in the recording of the film. I really didn't like her, honestly. Just as much as I disliked Jaime, he was a total doormat the entire game, and a yes man to Chris's whims. And when her and Robert, a character I personally think have better chemistry with her, tells him to back off for being jealous, and that he doesn't get 5 seconds with his girlfriend, ooh. I think he truly shines, though, as a character when he's with Bonnie and Linda. They've known each other for so long, especially Bonnie since they're blood-related, but unfortunately, it's mainly him and Chris. However, speaking of Bonnie, we don't get too much from her, all things considered. She just feels like a character who's made to die, and since the game has established its multiverse before she's killed, at least in my playthrough, it kept persisting with me. We do get a good idea of who she is, though. She's attracted to women when she started dating girls from her band, and she had given up everything there for her and Jaime's sick mother. But all things considered, she's kinda just there. But Robert is the most interesting one. I personally felt like he was underused. He could have been a great voice of reason. The only time he really takes charge is during Chapter 5, when they find Frank Stone's secret room where the parts of his victims were never found. I felt like it was weird. He seemed to be fully understood of what happened in the murder mill, likely from his father telling him to avoid it, and know his knowledge of his father's patterns, but he really didn't have the clarity to know what's going in there during the night was a bad idea, until a literal face was staring at him. I do understand that he's a horror buff, but it feels counterintuitive to his character, which in my opinion, he's studious, being an avid book reader and working volunteer hours at a library, so him to do something so out of left field just didn't rub the right way with me. I personally can't talk highly about the characters, except for the main 3 of Sam, Maddie, and Linda, as they fit a generic horror cliche, something you see in these types of games and media. But they do their jobs well enough, but they also just don't stand out, so I'll just have to rate it a 3 out of 5. I'd honestly rate it lower, but I genuinely believe that the main cast carry it that much. But speaking about carrying, you can't have a good story without a compelling villain, and I think Frank Stone is compelling enough. I will admit, I didn't enjoy the sections when he was a spectral, ghost, as I'll say later. They were kinda shit, but Frank Stone, who will become the champion, was cool. However, he was merely an accessory to the real villain of this game, being Augustine Lieber. She was a part of the Black Veil, a cult akin to the Illuminati in the Dead by Daylight world, controlling aspects of government when it's needed. She is smart, calculating, she's planned everything that's happened, which is told to us throughout her monologue she has between chapters.
I have worn many masks over the centuries. Dr. Augustine Lieber was renowned, professional, and trusted. Frank Stone confided in me, allowed me to unlock his potential during those dark days in the psychiatric ward. And now, a new guise, a new timeline, a new chance. Giving them the camera, I admit, was unfair, even for me. They couldn't know what power they held in their hands, nor what cruelty awaits them in the steel mill. But what true creator wouldn't suffer for their art.
She gave them the camera that revived Frank Stone. She groomed Frank Stone to see a higher calling.
This is Dr. Augustine Lieber conducting court-mandated psychological session 5 with patient Frank Stone, March 28th, 1961. I hear you've had a bad week since our last conversation, Frank. An attack on an orderly. Perhaps we could salvage this. Tell me, do you ever feel as though you have a higher calling?
She's talking to Frank Stone.
Of yours to inflict
Well, like,
pain on
she's
others to
guiding
punish them.
him.
I don't believe it is wholly errant. These sessions are all about taking responsibility, Frank. Not just for your past, but for your future, too. Yes, you have a future, and it could be boundless. You simply have to trust me.
And had the entity claim him even in death. She eventually touches the greed of man, which led them to obtaining the missing film strips that brought Frank Stone back to the mortal realm. And even if she may have died failing to get the entity's bounty, her body offered to the entity, it's highly implied that she knew it would happen, with the ending of the game showing alternate universe Augustine meeting an older her. However, her fate isn't set in stone, Frank Stone, as she may be immortal with the use of the hologram, but she is still trapped in the realm akin to someone like the Observer. But that's at least my theory. But Frank Stone, now known as the Champion, his fate is pretty straightforward. And what Augustine wanted, she crafted the perfect killer for the entity's realm, and the entity took him happily, as he got to a higher purpose, and the final relic of the game being a Frank Stone action figure. Ultimately, she got what she wanted in the end, and won. And because of that, I now really want Frank Stone in Dead by Daylight. If that will happen, who knows. But with all that being said, I have to give them both a 4 out of 5. But you know what isn't a 4 out of 5? I'm just gonna say it straight up. This game ran like ass for me. I tried so many things to get it to run at least somewhat well. I even brought out my Steam Deck, but I don't know if it's the game's engine that runs on it, or just not vibing with my recording software. But I had so many issues playing this game. Random stuttering when actions were done, the game taking 2, sometimes 3 reboots to even get to the main menu, and the most painful one, the game taking its sweet time to load scenes. I understand seamless transitions, but I'd prefer a small loading screen than the game outright freezing for 10 to 20 seconds. But I persevered due to my genuine interest in the game's world, but it felt like walking through mud. And the gameplay felt the exact same as well. It's what you would expect. Walking around, finding little secrets like the trinkets, collectibles of lore, trying to find secret rooms. Something I liked a lot is when you're searching actually has story relevance, like Maddie getting one up on Stan saying his full name due to his calling card in another room. But ultimately, this game is just nothing special. I do like how they remind you that the world you're in, when you repair free generators throughout your playthrough and other random skill checks, I can easily hit greats in this game, but when it matters in Dead by Daylight, I can't hit greats for shit. But that's at least good practice. But another little extra bit of gameplay that hits on Chapter 7, it's the first time you actually face Frank Stone in any real way. And it's so disappointing. You play as Linda in this small area with a generator. You're trying to turn a scissor lift to escape Frank Stone, who's following you. He has this presence. It feels tense. Until you actually do the gameplay. I don't know how they did it, but this little minigame is somehow less interactable than fucking Five Nights at Candy's Free. Sometimes Frank Stone uses his otherworldly powers to slightly move the camera. Ooh, spooky. But for real, this is really disappointing, as this is the only time the game changes up, and it's holding down a damn button and reeling every couple of seconds. Some super simple changes they can do to have him actually change his patterns throughout the game. You know, make him adapt. Maybe Frank moves out of the way, or maybe he teleports. Maybe Frank Stone makes a fake copy, and the only way to spot him is to see the real one is to look through the camera lens. You can see the real one, but the fake one you can't. Other than that, it's just what you expect. You choose options, fates change, characters get closer or not. It's just bland. Really bland. And it feels like they were just using a template and they put some little things in last minute. And I can't in goodwill rate this any higher than 1.5. It's harsh, but they really could have done more with it, especially since it's only 5 hours. But after those 5 hours, does the ending make up for it at least?
Frank Stone is finally the man he was meant to be. My champion. A killer worthy of the entity. The bleed between worlds is open, split apart by sacrifice and violence. All will be swallowed by the entity's power. And what of me? The one who served up this world for it to devour. I'll oblige as its faithful servant, existing only to drink in its knowledge, share in its glory. I am Augustine Lieber, and I have brought the entity to your world.
If you know anything about Dead by Daylight's lore, then you know how it will end, and I had a good idea and I wasn't surprised. However, due to that, it undermines the beginning of the game, as honestly it really doesn't matter if they live or die. As if they do survive, they're sent to the trials, where they will live for all of eternity, dying, suffering, and being drained of their will and hope until the entity is done with them and they're cast into the void, where they will stay for all of eternity. For the most part, dying before being claimed sounds more like a mercy killing than anything. The only things that really change is who actually makes it to the campfire, it being in between the realms of sorts, for the trials, a safe haven from the survivors, but they're fully aware that the killer is waiting in the woods, as when you make it by yourself, the person comments about that, but the original survivors stay quiet. Maybe it's them having their voices taken from them, or they're just seeing it for so long they just lost interest. They're likely seen hundreds, if not thousands, enter the realm one day, and likely hundreds more vanish without a trace. This isn't told in-game, but being a Dead by Daylight nerd, it's something for me to enjoy. Of course, there's an alternate ending if everyone dies, where you control the champion, and it's in first person, likely referencing killers being in first person. Approaching the campfire, ready for his first trial, I have to give the game one thing. Augustine's speech at the end is incredibly voice acted.
Whether killing or surviving, the entity will play with our souls for all eternity. An endless hunt of fear and hope, pain and sacrifice, from which even death is no escape. And now, let the trial begin.
But that's really it. There's no hope for a sequel. It wraps itself up really well, or leaving Augustine's fate open-ended. But there's not much you can really do. Once the entity has its claws on you, there's no escape, and the ending captures it really well. But at the same time, due to the fact that death is no escape, all the endings are just the same, all leading to the campfire, which brings it down for me, to be honest. And altogether, I'll just have to give it a 3 out of 5. But once you reach the campfire, or if you bought the digital deluxe edition, you get the cutting room floor. This lets you go back to previous choices and let people live or die. The main idea is to fill up the missing scenes to get alternate paths, which in a way, I think it fits in Dead by Daylight's universe, as tomes and outfits are usually not the original person taken into the realm. And an easy example of this is the were-elk, who is a monsterized version of the elk who killed the huntress's mother, and is highly implied to be also owning Anna's mask, that she killed her as well, and has it as a trophy. But I have issues with the cutting room floor, and it's a simple fact that as you go through the cutting room floor, you realize just how linear the game honestly is. Of course, people's fates are changed, relationships are strained or improved, and people die and whatnot, but most of the parts of the game ends the same way, regardless of if Stan dies, Bonnie dies, Maddie lives, etc. There's really only two endings, those being the people who survive Frank Stone in 2024 are stuck in the Entities realm, or everyone dies and Frank Stone goes onto his higher calling. How you get there, whatever decision you make, and whoever dies, it just really doesn't matter in the long run, and it's honestly disappointing. But that's honestly all they could have done. Like I said in my ending thoughts, once the entity has chosen its prey, you can't really escape, as it does consume whole realms and timelines, not just singular people. Another thing that makes it a little annoying is you can't fast forward or skip parts you've already played while you're doing alternate paths. There are sections of story you've already done, and you can sit through if you like it or not. Of course, you can skip forward and back, but when it goes to big scenes, you have to go back to a specific scene. For example, when Sam Green is fighting Frank Stone, you start from the moment you're in the boiler room, and you can't skip to when you're impaled, but I do understand why. However, I think it's not fair to say only bad about the cutting room floor. At least it tells you how many collectibles are in parts, how many people went down the path, but unfortunately though, at least in my opinion, as short as the game is, I can't really say it has replayability or really any reason for you to want to go for all these different paths. One massive thing I would put in the cutting room floor to bump its flow and for people to replay it is to let the player create their own paths instead of limiting it to certain playthroughs. Let's say in one playthrough you stopped Frank Stone and stole Bonnie's money, but in the other you didn't stop Frank Stone and asked for the money straight up. Just let the player make that branching path themselves. Of course, if the path is impossible, then they'll just have to continue at a certain path, but needing to do 2 to 3 hours to just get to one path is just a little too demanding when one of those hours is just rewatching the same cutscenes, because once again, you can't skip dialogue. However, the cutting room floor is a good part in the game. For those who want to see more fates than the ones you have chosen in your first playthrough, even I didn't enjoy the multiple replays I did for this video, I am thankful that Supermassive gave us the option to skip, even if they don't have dialogue skip and doesn't allow you to create your own path. So with those two downsides, it really does bump it down to 2.5 out of 5 for me. But I am really thankful that they gave us the option. I will say though, if you are interested in seeing all the endings, the YouTuber D-Strike made a fantastic video, and I recommend. I will link it in the description below. But now, let's cast judgment on Frank Stone. I want to say that I like casting of Frank Stone, but it's just really disappointing. Not enough to say that it's a bad game, but enough to say that it was painfully mid. I can't say I've really connected with the characters except for Sam and Linda. They carried the game on their back. The game's performance was all over the place, and made sections almost feel unplayable. And the sections with Frank Stone were uninspired. Even if Frank Stone himself is an interesting killer, and has a shot coming into Dead by Daylight in the future, I can't really say reeling a camera is riveting gameplay. But ultimately, I was in the ride for the Dead by Daylight stuff for the most part. Murder Mill, Cedar Hills, and the characters around it may as well not exist, as I was invested in learning about Augustine and her unyielding lust for the entity. As much as I'll put the game down for being boring and uninspired, the little Dead by Daylight trinkets, Easter eggs, playing the menu on the piano, completing generators, and especially the ending, is enough for me to feel somewhat glad I played the game. I do believe that the developers wanted to make an experience that the Dead by Daylight community will love, and in aspects, I do think that they did it, but it's just the little things that keep adding up that make me both not recommend it and not strive to see everything it has to offer. But that's just how I feel about the casting of Frank Stone. Putting the score together, it leaves it to be a 3 out of 5, which I think is being a little generous, but at least I would say it's around that score at its best. But with that, thank you for watching this video. This is my first time making a longer video in the sense of a video essay, I guess you can say. I plan on doing these more in the future when specific games catch my interest and when I finally finish the Persona 4 Golden Diary. But if you're interested in my ramblings, please like and subscribe. I would also humbly like to ask for any writing tips or suggestions on formatting these better, since I know I can do better, but I have issues of proofreading my stuff. But for real, thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful Halloween.